Thinking about starting a podcast, but you don't know where to begin, or you feel like there are certain fears or limitations that are holding you back from having your own podcast? Well, in this video, I'm going to clear out some of the myths and remove the fear that is associated with podcasting so you can get started. Podcasting is a wonderful opportunity to connect with more people, learn a lot of new things about your niche, and reach out to more people. So why are so many people afraid or shy of starting their own podcasts? And I was in this situation for quite a long time, actually. I think I had like 2 or 3 different attempts at creating my own podcast. I said, I'm going to create the podcast. It's going to be about this. And I told my audience about one of them, and none of those podcasts ended up happening. But now I finally have my own podcast after a lot of hard work, after a lot of false starts. So I'm going to share with you what I know about that whole experience from start to finish of I want to start a podcast to all these things holding me back to get rid of all that and let's just get this podcast going. I want to share with you that entire journey, some takeaways that you can get so that you can start your own podcast. The key thing about any type of thing that you are fearful of, any type of work where there's uncertainty, you're not sure of, rapid action is the solution. The moment that you start taking action, the work becomes much easier to do. There's a lot less fear involved because a lot of the fear is the uncertainty, thinking about messing up, doing something wrong, and just not knowing where to go. There's not really a straight path. You got to get through a lot of fog, but a lot of that fog is created due to inaction. So the moment that you take action, it's going to be easier. And taking action for me meant sending out emails to potential guests who I wanted to have on the podcast. And I was thinking, if all of these people say no, then I'm not going to have this podcast. But sure enough, I got a lot of people to say yes, and that meant I was committed to having the podcast. It's great to have guests on your podcast because when you're sending out these invites and you're getting a bunch of people to say yes, you suddenly become committed to having that podcast. And that is a huge difference between starting off a podcast with you alone versus having a bunch of guests who you have to schedule interviews for, you have to get the audio right. So there's a lot more pressure, but we thrive under that pressure if there are fewer things holding us back. So the moment that you jump in, that's like there's no taking it back now. You're committed. So once you are committed to podcasting, you suddenly have the sense of urgency to learn about getting the right audio, getting better at doing the podcast, learning how to actually conduct a podcast and interview someone. So there's more urgency to learn about doing all of those steps for having a successful podcast. But at the same time, you do not want to rush yourself to a point where you are not confident about the audio, and then some of the audio is messed up for some of your interviews because you'll get a bunch of guests who are not happy with that performance, and it'll be very hard to convince future guests to come to your show, and you don't want to have a lot of those types of mistakes in the beginning. Now, it's okay to not sound so smooth in the beginning because you're getting used to it, but you do not want to have a mistake with your audio. So in order to get that down, you want to do some tests with your friends before you actually interview these guests to see how you're going to get the audio to work. How are you going to get the audio to work so that you sound good, the guest sounds good, and the podcast sounds like a professional work. Now, it doesn't have to sound perfect. You don't have to make your podcast sound like something that's going to be on TV. It just has to sound good, and people have to be able to understand what you and the guest are saying. So you want to have friends help you out with that first. And an important thing to note, if you schedule the interviews that you have with the guests a few weeks later on, then you have more time to test and to get it right and to figure out what exactly makes one of your podcast interviews one of your interviews. So what questions would you be asking, and how would the whole episode be structured? So when I sent out these invites to potential guests and they said yes, I gave myself a 2 to 3 week buffer to figure it all out, to get the audio tested, and to fully understand what would make one of my episodes truly mine. So if one of my listeners listens to a bunch of podcasts, how can they tell mine apart from the others if they randomly heard mine and didn't know who it was until the episode began? So I had to do that, and getting those 2 to 3 weeks to do that was very valuable. It took a lot of the stress off, but at the same time, I was committed. It wasn't a deadline where I had months and months and months to think about this stuff, because if you give yourself too big of a deadline, you'll keep on thinking, I'll do it later, and then nothing's done. There's just a day left, and then that's when the podcast gets canceled, or that's just when it doesn't happen. So you want to give yourself a respectable amount of time, and not too much, but also not too little, where you're trying to get this all done in 2 days. So you need to hit that middle ground, and depending on who you are, the middle ground will be different, but nothing more than a month, because anything less than a month, that will challenge you to figure things out faster. Now, you may be someone who doesn't have much experience with talking to people through audio interviews, or just doesn't have much experience with doing videos or audio in general. So in order to get that experience, what you should do is you should start with YouTube and just do videos. They don't have to be perfect. The audio doesn't have to be perfect. The lighting doesn't have to be perfect. The key thing is, if you haven't done any of this, you just start doing videos, or even audio if you choose to do so. You don't want people to see you on the camera just yet. You have to start putting your voice on the web. And as you put your voice on the web more often, you will feel more comfortable with that. And you want to have that level of comfort with doing a video or doing a podcast interview, because when you are interviewing the guest, you should be focused on interviewing that guest. You should be focused on asking the right questions, listening to the guest also, so you can ask questions that may not necessarily be on your sheet of paper that you bring in as you prepare for each podcast episode. So you have to be doing all of those things. If you're thinking about the fear of people hearing your voice on the web, or the fear of people hearing it and it's not right, something doesn't go planned, something like that, well, you don't want to worry about that type of stuff when you're doing the podcast interview. So doing videos like this one, even if they don't see you, even if you do not even put them on a place like YouTube, you will get more comfortable with the experience, and you will eventually become more confident with interviewing these people, doing videos, putting your voice out there. And that will result in better podcast interviews. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions about podcasting, if you want me to do a video about something specific, then I highly encourage you to post that as a comment, because I look through all the comments to get ideas of what should be my next video. And I appreciate all types of engagement this video gets, whether a like or a dislike, just so I can see how my video is doing and which types of videos I should be focusing on for my YouTube channel. And if you are someone who needs to get more retweets on Twitter, then I have the perfect ebook for you. 27 ways to get more retweets on Twitter. These are the methods I use to get hundreds of retweets every single day, get more exposure for my content on Twitter, and build a lot of great connections with people who I interacted on with Twitter a few years ago, and I still know them, and I still interact with them to this day. Twitter is a very valuable platform if you know how to get your content out there to a lot of people. Retweets are how you do that. So if anyone's interested in getting that exposure from Twitter, my free ebook is a valuable resource that will allow you to get that added exposure. So, signing off, thank you for watching this video. I hope it has served you, and what I want you to do is to dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today.